narrow in our scope now of kind of the people and things that we've been looking at. We just finished up with Noah and his family, and Pastor Rob says, Bubba, we get, Bubba, we get, Bubba, we get, Bubba, there in the first part of chapter 11. So we're going to move kind of away from the world scope, from creation and all the kind of stuff that is in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, and we're going to move into mainly chapter 12. Again, God narrows in our focus here. The writer of the book of Genesis kind of narrows in our focus on a certain family and some individuals from that family and kind of their story going forward. Of course, we know Abram and Sarah and Lot. We know their story very well and how God promised to bring the Jewish nation from Abraham and promised to bless his people and all the stuff that we're going to kind of look at today. So the title of this lesson is God's Unconditional Promises. And the major thing here is faithfulness, right? We're going to spend probably the next 3 or 4 chapters dealing with just faithfulness. Faithfulness, 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 faithfulness. Because it's a critical staple of the foundation of our faith, right? If we are faithful to God, God will be faithful to us, and so on and so forth. We're going to see some examples of God's faithfulness and how God is worthy of our faithfulness to Him as well. So up to this point, we've been dealing with humanity in a universal manner, and then we select, God kind of moves in here to selecting one man, specifically Abram, to communicate his unconditional faithfulness, his promises of giving land and offsprings and blessings, and then God kind of continues to show his faithfulness to Abram as well. We'll start today by coming up with some synonyms for the word faithfulness. Yell them out. Synonyms for the word faithfulness. Synonym is a word that means the same thing, but it's not. I know it's summertime.
Trusting.
Trusting, good.
Loyalty.
Loyalty, good. Anything else?
Dependability.
Dependability, that's a good one. Any more? Steadfast. Devotion. Let's see what else do I have. Reliable, true. Okay, those are all synonyms for faithfulness. How do you know somebody's faithful?
They have to prove it.
Have to prove it. How do they prove it? By not failing, right? Observable instances, right? You can see in somebody's life when they say they're going to do something, they do it, they follow through to completion. So you can see observable facts in their lives that shows that they are faithful. Completion of promised acts, right? I promise they're going to do something, and then they follow through with it. And they do that over and over and over again, and you can see the evidence of faithfulness in somebody's life. It's easier to observe someone's faithfulness when you are considering his actions or her actions towards people in general, and also their actions to one or two specific people, right? See how people are faithful on the way in which they act. In your opinion, before we get into this, what's the key to being faithful? What's the key to being faithful? Some of you guys have been saved for a long time, right? What's the key to being faithful?
Knowing the consequences of not being faithful.
It's good. Knowing the opposite. It's a good way of knowing how to keep being faithful. Anything else?
Fixing your heart. Purposing in your heart to be faithful.
Good. Making conscious decisions to be faithful. Anything else? Some keys in your God's life? No.
Totally taken with the one you're faithful to.
And being totally taken, depending on God. Right? Depending on God. Being committed to it. Regardless of the storms, regardless of the good times, every decision depending on God. Depending upon God through prayer and your decisions, being committed to Him. Okay? How does human faithfulness differ from God's faithfulness to us? How does human faithfulness differ from God's faithfulness?
Never let you down.
God never lets you down, as opposed to humans who will sometimes let you down. Right? So God's faithfulness is constant. All right? It's perfect. Human faithfulness wavers. Okay? Okay, there's times there where you ask somebody to do something and expect them to do it, but sometimes I'm not sure they're going to come through with it or not, because sometimes it wavers, and that's the case for all of us. God's does not. Right now, so we're going to look at probably today and next week as well, God's selection in his relationship with Abram, of course, later named Abraham, to communicate God's unconditional promises to him. Okay, he then demonstrates his faithfulness by telling him he's going to do these things, and then we see these things being accomplished in Abram's life as well. So, first of all, God's faithful selection. We see the last two verses of chapter 11, and specifically, let's start with Abram's family history. We did a little bit of this last week, but just kind of a reminder for us. So, verse 31 here of chapter 11, and Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, whose sons, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife. And they went forth with him from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay? So we see the family history here of Abraham first. Abram, of course, again, we'll later refer to and remain as Abraham, began a move at the prompting of his father, okay, Terah, from one side to the other of what we now know as the Fertile Crescent. Okay, so they're moving from one side of the Fertile Crescent to the other side. Kind of sparse here on the details of the reasons why. Kind of sparse here on even the direction that they took. But we see that the move started with the urging from his father. Okay? Now, the verses, again, the preceding ones go on this, very sparse on details. A lot of questions kind of arise from the text here as well, things that aren't answered. Such as, how did Abram's brother Haran, how did he die? Was Abram or Terah here the primary caregiver for the nephew Lot? Why did they decide to move from Ur of the Chaldeans to Canaan? Some historic and even some modern commentaries kind of view the families picking up and moving here away from Ur as a term away from the idolatry that was there. Again, that's just conjecture and thought, and no actual basis for that anywhere. So the reasons of them actually getting up and moving here are not answered anywhere in scriptures. So we'll just kind of leave it unanswered as well. A lot of things you can read to kind of gives you some reason to think. We don't see any actual justifiable proof in scriptures. We just know that they moved. Okay. So we see that them moving over to Canaan, of course, gives us the setup here for the rest of this story for a couple of chapters, kind of the main human protagonist here, right? Abram. And we're going to kind of see what's going on. So the book of Genesis, in this section here, starts with Abram, and it starts with chapter 12. And there's no family details here that highlight the family as being faithful or their godliness at this point. Nothing we see about that at all. We don't really know much about Abram's spiritual upbringing to this point. But, there's no special circumstances here that make Abram and his family any different than anybody else living at this time. Okay? Abram was just a dude that was alive, and his family were just people like everybody else. Okay? No special qualities here at all as far as kind of who they are. Alright? So God's interest here in choosing Abram has less to do with Abram than it has to do with God himself. God's selection of Abram was based on faithfully continuing his plan, not on how great a guy Abram was or how great a guy he was going to be. Right? God just had a specific plan. Abram was involved in it. As a matter of fact, selecting kind of an unassuming guy like Abram draws the focus even more to God's faithfulness. Okay? God didn't use Nimrod here. Right? He didn't change Nimrod's heart and use Nimrod's family. He could have. Nimrod was a prominent person a little bit before this. He could have very easily done it. God didn't. He just used a regular old Joe. Right? Just used Abram. Unassuming, just to kind of show his faithfulness even more. So God selects Abram here, first 3 verses of chapter 12. Genesis is going to introduce God's speech to Abram with a verb tense of past perfect. No, I'm getting some school on you today. Indicates, though, that God had previously kind of communicated with Abram. That's kind of why it's written the way that it is. Now the Lord has said unto Abram, verse 1 of chapter 12, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. All right, so we see God tells this and communicates this to Abram, and the words here show a slow development in Abram's initial belief, kind of making the following words that God uses here kind of more surprising. All right? Now, if we go over the New Testament, and Stephen kind of talks specifically about Abram first hearing from God. So if you go over to Acts chapter 7 with me, and let's look at the first 4 verses. And it says this, Then said the high priest, Are these the things so? And he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Haran, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into the land wherein ye now dwell. So when did God first speak to Abram here? While he was where? What's it say? Verse 2. Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is also known as Ur. Okay? So God first speaks to Abraham when he was in Ur, and tells him, back to Genesis chapter 12, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. There is a delay here in Abram's obedience, right? Because we see in Acts 7 that he settled in Haran first, right? Back over to Acts 7, you know, I've forgotten right here. It said unto him, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and then dwelt where? It says, dwelt in Haran, and from thence. So he moved, not to where God told him to, but he moved out of the Chaldeans and went to Haran first. There is a delay here in the obedience of Abraham. Okay? There was a delay here. And what do we see because of this delay shows that Abram was what? His faith in God was what? Wavering, not real strong here, right? God says, get up from where you're at and move to where I tell you to. Well, Abram got up, he didn't go to where God told him to. He went to Haran first, and he settled there for a while. And then God, urging here again, get out of thee, back in verse 1 of chapter 12, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred. So there's a delay here. His faith's not strong. He's not fully obeying God's direction. Despite Abram's reluctance, though, to fully follow God, God still selected and uses Abram, to be the one that God's going to continue his plan and reveal himself to all the people through. Okay, God's choice of Abram was not based upon Abram's special ability to obey God. In fact, we see him having some reluctance in obeying God here. At best, his family members were just recently converted, possibly from idolatry. Very young in their faith. They hadn't much faith at all. And God's choice was based on God's gracious and loving character. God's faithfulness already the promises that he'd already communicated, such as defeating and delivering the world from Satan. God is starting to set up the fulfillment of those promises, going to be advanced through this sinner of Abram. God's plan here transitioned to one man when he commanded Abram to leave his family and to go to a land that God would show him. First 11 chapters of Genesis, God's interaction of humanity on a universal scope. Chapter 12, God selects one man, one person, and ultimately his descendants, that God's going to continue his plan even further. Okay? Alright, so we see verses 1 through 3, specifically verse 3, something known as the Abrahamic covenant. Right? God says to him, a land that I will show thee, I'm going to make thee a great nation. In thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. He goes on to say, I'm going to bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. This is known as the Abrahamic covenant. God promised to make Abram a great nation, to bless Abram, to make his name great, to bless those that bless him, curse those that curse him, and bless all the families of the earth because of Abram. Now, what makes a nation great? In just regular, common, earthly terms. What makes a nation great? What makes America so great? As far as other countries and other nations. We're free. What else? Military power. What else?
Originally, that was on the Word of God.
What's that?
The Constitution was originally founded on.
Exactly, yeah. Originally, everything was based on the Word of God. Wealthy, right? Most close to we are now, one of the wealthiest nations. Right? So wealth, growing population, laws, having the industry and stuff that we have, freedom, power, all those things make great nations. Now, God makes several promises here to Abram. The first one was to make him into a great nation. Now, we know that in verse 30 of chapter 11 of Genesis, what does it say? Sarah was barren and had no children. So now we've got God talking to Abram, telling him all these great things he's going to do through him. He's going to make you a great nation. It's going to be, people are going to be able to number them. You're going to be powerful, and all these great things that God is promising him. And Abram here at this point, if you look at verse 4 of chapter 12, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. Abram was how old here? 75, when he finally got out of here. So, 75-year-old man here, these timelines are now much less, lifespans are now much less than they were pre-flood. So, Abram is an older man here. His wife has no children. She's been barren now the entire time they have been married. And God just gets done telling him all these great things he's going to do through Abram. This is a truly remarkable promise. Okay? In Abram's eyes here, you've got to think. He and Sarah have been married for some time now, and tried to have children for quite some time, and it never happened. And God shows up when Abram's 75 and says, you know what, Abram? Through you, I'm going to make this a great, huge nation. And you're going to be the line that starts it. It's going to come through you. So this is a remarkable promise. Because it indicates that both God would make Abram into a great nation numerically, and a nation of great significance as well. Of course, we know the Bible later reveals and names this nation Israel. So that was the first promise, make it a great nation. The second promise was that he was going to bless Abram. I will make, back to verse 2, chapter 12, I will make thee a great nation. Secondly, I will bless thee and make thy name great. Okay? So the second promise to Abram here is to bless. Now, the word blessed appears 5 times in Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 11. 5 different instances we see God use the word bless. In contrast to that, the word appears 5 times just in the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 12. Okay? So there's 5 times through the whole entire first 7 books, or first 7 chapters. We see it now 5 times in just these 3 verses. God's blessing of Abram and his family is a major component of God's unique promise here that he's offering up and telling Abram he's going to do. God promises to bless Abram is a commitment to prosperity. Commitment to family growth, to success, actual physical protection, and some of these are more kind of made more prominent as you kind of continue to look through. The third promise here is that he's going to make his name great. So a promise to make a great nation and a blessing, going to make his name great. Now, this did not mean that Abraham would just simply be famous because, of his name, although that did happen. The promise meant that Abram's name would be highly regarded. Here on out, Abram, your name is going to be highly regarded. Bless your name and make it great. Be highly regarded amongst people. You would be a man with good character. God's purpose for this promise was for Abram to be a blessing to other people around him. Okay? Make sure that Abram was a blessing to the other people who were around him. He became a blessing because of what God did through him. The promise is less about how great Abram became and more about God's greatness seen through Abram. And nothing what Abram did, right? And he obviously, and we know the story, and we know what he does, and the great things that he goes to accomplish. But it's all because of what God does through Abram. Treating Abram well was the same as treating God well. And therefore, people received God's blessings because they treated Abraham well. And then conversely, people who treated Abraham poorly treated God poorly, and then therefore they were cursed. Okay? And had problems. The final promise here of this is communicated with the universal implications of God's choice of Abram. Through this one man, God, his progeny, all the families of earth are going to be blessed. Right? The end of verse 3. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. God promises here to deliver humanity from Satan through a descendant that came from Eve down through Abram. Of course, that descendant would be Jesus Christ. Right, God's selection of just one man here and focusing the revelation of God's character through this one man shows his continued plan for redemption of mankind that he mentioned back in the very first beginnings of the world back in Genesis. God's characteristics here become clearer through his dealings with Abram, through his dealings later on with Israel as well, and then through his dealings with mankind. God selecting Abram and then providing for him, supernaturally working through him, reveals God's ownership of pretty much everything. Right? So we're going to see God's sovereignty of the entirety of the world by dealing with Abram and the promises that he sets up with Abram, and then how he completes them as well. Right? We've said this a couple times. It's really, really cool to see. God said this was going to happen. Okay? He told Abram this was going to happen. He told David this was going to happen. He told these people that this stuff was going to happen. We can flip through Scripture or look back in our own human history and see exactly what God said was going to take place took place. Every time. 100% of the time. It never fails. Right? It's one of the cool things we get to do is see how God had fulfilled these promises. And he was faithful to these promises as well. So Abram here becomes the pivotal person. At this point in human history, Abram is the pivotal person dealing with God's promises. Okay? And then dealing with, of course, all of humanity as well. Alright, so we see, first of all, go back real quick, God's selection, faithful selection, and then we see his faithfulness as well. And we'll do these 5 verses and then we'll be done. God's generous faithfulness first. Look at verse 4 down through verse 9. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old, and he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. and into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain of the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. So we now see God, His generous faithfulness. God immediately, as soon as Abram gets up and moves, He immediately demonstrates His faithfulness by bringing him into the land that He had promised He would give him while he was living in earth. Okay? So this is however many years or months this has been now. God shows Abram, this is the land of Canaan. This is what I promised you back when you were living in earth. So He demonstrates it very quickly, His faithfulness to them. Now, despite the passage here of many years and Abram's initial failure to obey, God remained faithful to His word that He told Abram way back when he was still living where he was living at. Abram has now found out specifically from God what was promised to him in verse 4. God was not only taking Abram to Canaan, but He was giving him Canaan as well. Okay? Promising that He was going to have God, as the creator of earth and of Canaan, has the right to give the land to anybody He wants to. He's the ownership of it. In this case, He gives it to Abram. And it serves to show as a platform here how He would demonstrate the character of Abraham, through the generations that kind of come through. Now, as we read down through verses 4 through 9, what are some of the human impossibilities that God would have to overcome by giving Canaan to Abraham's descendants? What are some of the things that He was going to, human impossibilities?
Causing him to have a son.
What's that?
Causing him to have a son.
You're going to have him, give him a son was one, a human impossibility. Anything else? He's also going to have to do what? Were there people living in Canaan right now? There were Canaanites there, right? And God was going to have to give him the boot. So He was going to have to give Sarah a son, which would humanly be physically impossible. And He was going to have to kick out nations that were living in Canaan, which would have been humanly impossible for Abraham and Sarah and a couple of family members to do. They couldn't go in there and just kick them out. God was going to have to intervene and divinely intervene to make this thing take place. Okay? And of course, after Abram arrives in the land here, he kind of sees God kind of reciprocating some of the faithfulness, and then He reciprocates the faithfulness back to God and the Son. Alright? The Lord appears to him near Shechem, as we see in verse 6, and reiterates the promise again concerning the land. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and Canaanites was then in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram again and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto the altar. So Abraham, after arriving, sees all these people here, and he's like, how in the world is this going to work? How is this going to happen? There are nations here, there are armies, and all this stuff kind of going on. How in the world is this going to work? When God shows up again and tells him, Abram, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Just be faithful. Just be faithful. Just be faithful. Okay? Abram then continues to move down to the central portion, builds the altar between Bethel and Ai, and kind of goes on down through verse 9. We see moving down towards the southern part of the region as well. Interested, of course, in seeing both what the land was like that God was going to give them, and who lived there. So that's where, kind of where we'll leave Abraham at for now. God's showing him the land of Canaan. Interestingly enough, the land of Canaan, present day, do we know what present day Canaan is? If we were like to bring a map out, present day Canaan, does anybody know? We hear about it a lot in the news.
The Iraq or Iran.
Yeah, it is, and more so the Gaza Strip, right? That's kind of the big area. Iraq and Iran is, but it's, the Gaza Strip is kind of the big area. That's kind of the beginning of land of Canaan. And what do we know about the Gaza Strip? You've had to heard about the Gaza Strip. What's going on with the Gaza Strip all the time? They're still fighting over it. Who's fighting over it? The Palestinians and the Israelites, right? And I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, I have to refresh upon my history, that the Palestinians say that they own the land, right? And that the nation of Israel is not really a nation, and they have no right to this Gaza Strip, this piece of land here. And of course, we know that the Israelites consider that their land because even the Jews who don't believe in God on the side, they look back at their history and say, well, God gave us this land, this is rightfully ours. Palestinians, full of Muslims, and we're going to get into all kind of how all that happens later on, are always trying to push, and they're always fighting over this area. Okay? And we've heard peace in the Middle East, and also we know it's never going to happen because of this very thing. All right? Satan is the driving force behind the Palestinians, trying to take over this land that God was promising to Abraham and the Israelites before they were marched out, and all the stuff that happened with them during World War II and all the kind of things that happened. There's been a bunch of different ways in which the Jews have been trying to be gotten rid of by other nations. Of course, we know it never happens. God's promising them here. But this area, this hotbed of a lot of fighting stuff in the Gaza Strip is the land of Canaan, kind of where we're talking about. Okay? And the reason they're fighting there is because of the Palestinians and the Muslims and the fighting against the Jews. And that actually brings us into Ishmael and Isaac, which we'll get into later. That's kind of where this starts. Okay? Which will be really, really interesting to see Abraham, because of Abraham's failure in his not trusting in God and siring his son with Hagar, right? Yes, the handmaid. We see the problems in the division with the Hagar. Okay, so we're going to be kind of mentioning this a lot. But that I want to kind of put that in your mind. Sometimes we say Canaan and the land of Canaan and milk and honey and all that stuff is happening there. Yes, but presently it's the Gaza Strip, Iraq, that kind of area, the Jordan River still there, all that kind of stuff. Okay? We're going to kind of be looking at as we continue to see God demonstrating his faithfulness to Abraham and to the nation of Israel as well. And we see God even today continuing to demonstrate his faithfulness to Israel. He promised they would never be destroyed. They have tried. Israel as a nation pretty much just turned back on God. I don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. But because they're God's chosen people, God has continued to keep his hand on them and protect them as well. Even allowed them to go through some stuff because of their disobedience to him. But he has continued to protect them throughout all of history, which again just shows the faithfulness of God. This is 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. God said this is going to happen. He's continuing to do it. It's really, really cool to kind of see God's faithfulness to that. And we'll continue to look through this as we continue to look at Abraham. Abraham and his faithfulness, his lack of faithfulness, and some of the decision and consequences that he has as well. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson that we have here. Thank you for Abraham and his faith and the lessons that you use to teach us through his life. The importance of what it means to honorably serve and be faithful to you. So Lord, I pray that's the desire of our hearts today. As we've seen today, as we will continue to see, as we continue to move through the book of Genesis, these men and women a lot of times are just up against some impossible conditions and consequences, but they remain steadfast to you, and you, of course, remain steadfast and faithful to them and bless them more than they can probably possibly imagine. So I pray that it's the same for us, that regardless of our